everybody. My name is, well, first of all, welcome to Strictly Speaking Conversations with Theater Makers. My name is Jayme Mellema. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the resident scenic designer for University Theater. We're so happy to have all of you joining us tonight for the series. I want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in for your support of the art of NC State and of University Theater. So our guest tonight is production manager for Berkeley Rep, Audrey Hu. Audrey, welcome to the show.
Whoa,
This will be, yeah, no problem. And welcome.
Hey again, and I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Audrey, as you know. I use she, her pronouns. I usually like to start any meeting or event off by acknowledging the lands that I am on. So I want to start this off by acknowledging that I have continued to benefit from the use and occupation of ancestral and unceded land of the Chicano-speaking Alani people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. So this land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. If you don't know whose lands you're on, I really encourage you to look it up. And if you feel, I'm going to encourage you to feel free to drop it in the chat.
Yeah.
Drop the link right there. You know, as you kind of peel back and look back into the history of the lands, it's really interesting to read and find out more about the history of where you live in, where you reside.
Yeah, I'm excited to do the same. I have discovered we are currently on the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina's lands myself.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to finding out more about that myself.
Cool.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you. We went to UNC School of the Arts together,
Yes.
but didn't connect a whole lot while we were there because we were in very different worlds. But also, I wanted to say congrats on the keynote speaking at USITT.
Oh, thank you.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, that came up really interestingly. And as a production manager, I really actually don't like being on stage or being in front of folks. You know, but I did feel an enormous responsibility to take whatever opportunity and platform I'm given to, you know, amplify some ideas and thoughts and voices that might not have the opportunity to do so. So that was really exciting to be able to do that and be invited to do that for USITT.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that when we were at school, it was called NCSA, not UNCSA. And I actually now cannot remember which years we overlapped, but it's such a distant past.
I know, right? What years were you there?
Oh gosh, I don't even, you know, I think it was 03 to 06, and I didn't defend my thesis. I left because there was a job opportunity.
Right.
And I came back at the end of 07 to defend it. So technically,
so quite a bit of overlap.
Yeah, so technically my degree says 07, but I consider myself class of 06, I guess.
Right. I was 4 through 7, so yeah, basically that whole time. Essentially.
Right. So what I did there was my MFA in technical direction, but truly I am a production manager. So it was kind of a sideways way to get technical knowledge that I felt like I was missing.
Okay.
And then kind of stepping right back into what I was doing before I came to the United States. So I was production managing even before that time.
I did not know that at the time, and have discovered obviously since, but I in looking back at your stuff on LinkedIn and everything, and I was like, so that the TD thing seemed to be quite a small sidetrack. I wondered what the story was about that.
So in the Singapore theater, so Singapore is a country in Southeast Asia, for those who don't know. And I would say that the theater scene there was and is still really thriving,
Mm-hmm.
with a lot more focus, I think, on artists and creating works. And we were really trying to advocate for technicians and folks in the technical skilled trades. So in general, I got out of college and almost right away found my path into a full-time position at a theater company called TheaterWorks. I was working for the managing director at the time, general manager and the managing director, and
Mm-hmm.
really quickly discovered I was not fond of administration work. And it was really enamored by the production manager and wanted to just follow her all the time. I wanted to stay late all the time. I wanted to see what was going on.
Right.
So really quickly discovered I like doing production work mostly, and so then switched right into production management. I production managed at the Necessary Stage in Singapore, and then at the Esplanade Art Center, which is this ginormous art center in Singapore. And from there, it was really clear that I needed, it was clear to me that I really wanted to find more technical knowledge in a more concise amount of time. So that's really why I ended up coming to the US and focusing on technical direction.
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how have things been going at Berkeley? Like,
it's been a rough year.
It seems like you've been keeping busy.
Yeah, I think this is the year, almost an exact year from the time the first shelter in place orders went in Alameda County or Berkeley, California. And it's been brutal. I think it's the same for most performing arts across the country. I think that the tremendous loss of work and income, and just questions of how we come back. There's so many questions. So Berkeley, most of my production department were furloughed or laid off. And I was the only production person left for a long time. And now we've just rolled on a couple people again, which is exciting. It's, so I think we are in the moment that a lot of production managers across the country are thinking about, like, how do we open safely? What are the guidelines to keep performers safe and patrons safe? And I think it's easier to think about risk mitigation for staff and small groups of cast and staff members, but it's much more difficult to think about risk mitigation for front of house facing, like, patrons, an audience, because that's then in the hundreds and thousands of people that you have to, like, manage. So so I've done a lot of budgets, a lot of schedules. I've helped write with the committee at Berkeley Rep, the COVID kind of workplace prevention plan. We have received part of the touring. So Ain't Too Proud national tour is about to launch, and we were fortunate to be able to bid on several pieces of the scenery and the props package. So that's really why my team is kind of back, because we're helping that fabrication process.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Super exciting. Yeah.
What kinds of things have been, like, helping you stay motivated or, like, not descend into the land of despair?
I think giving space for that, for grief and despair. And I think that besides the pandemic, really the awareness of social injustices and how much more work we need to do in the performing arts industry. So, I think for me personally, as one of the not a lot of BIPOC production managers in the country. So I feel an enormous, almost responsibility to continue at it. I mean, the days that I'm like, maybe I should go work for Google and Apple. And a lot of times I feel like if this was the door that opened for me and the opportunity that came to me, then there's some responsibility in that. So that keeps me going. It keeps me going when I have fellows in the young 20s reach out to me. And I can see like, oh wow, it's like we're almost now the next, so we've moved up a generation, right? We were first like
Yeah.
that generation of like, how do I get into the business? And
Uh-huh.
then we slowly kind of moved up, and now it's like, oh, now I can help somebody else come
Hmm.
along. So there's a lot of joy in that. I think there's a lot of joy um in the energy and the excitement.
Yeah, I can feel that too. Like, yes, I agree. It's been difficult and soul searching and also joyful. Like there's been a lot of it's it's been a difficult pause, but I think a fruitful one.
Yeah.
um, so let's talk a little bit more about production management, because not
Yeah.
everybody may know what that is. So can you like define for in your words, or what is a production manager and what does that role mean for you?
Yeah, the thing, okay, so I think of production managers as the the people make that help make an artist's vision reality in
Mhm,
time and in budget.
mhm.
So the example I like to give often is, okay, if an artist has an idea to fly a fully sculpted built cow across the stage, and midway through the
Mhm.
stage it would explode into like cold pyrotechnics and there's confetti that falls down, and then somebody else would fly in. um Often it's my time to like, okay, that's a wonderful vision, and then figure out what do we need to get this to be a reality. Do we have enough money? Can we do it safely? Why is that important, right? Like, so
Yes.
sometimes if I don't have enough money to do it, what I'm trying to get out of an artist is, why is this moment on stage important in the storytelling? So
Mhm.
the is it the cow? Is it the thing flying in? Can we have something smaller? And then I can be part of creating that story with the resources we have. So
Yeah.
um, on a very specific level, every time I've switched jobs, that I've done something different. So like that is really, it's so different. Production managers in live events to opera, dance, visual arts to theaters, we all do something a little bit different. Um,
Mhm.
I think budgets and schedules generally remain the same. Generally, all of the physical elements that you see on stage, those departments report to the
Mhm.
production managers. So scenery,
Yeah.
lighting, sound, video, costumes and wigs, scenic paints, stage management. Uh, so those kind of like everything that you see on stage somehow reports back up to the production manager. And then
Yeah.
contract negotiations sometimes gets wrapped into my world. So I negotiate and contract USA designers.
Right.
Uh,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, sometimes the general managers do it, and sometimes I do it.
Yeah, that varies from place to place on who handles a lot of that, but
Absolutely, yeah. And then creating schedules, like creating
yeah.
big picture schedules so that every department has their own like Gantt charts and the way they
Yeah.
build out. But I do big picture kind of season planning with the artistic director and managing director. And then from institution to institution, sometimes I do the budgets from beginning to end. At Berkeley Rep, I work very closely with the general manager, and she really drives the Excel sheets. Like at ACT and at BAM, I would do a lot of those budget templates.
Gotcha. So you mentioned season. Do you as a PM generally are you involved at all in the planning of the season content or just sort of the mapping of the season?
Mostly the mapping of the season. So a lot of times the artistic director has an idea or has a relationship,
Yeah.
or it comes from the managing director. So sometimes it's opportunistic, and sometimes it's a relationship that's been there for a long time.
Right.
The way I, as a production manager, interact with it is very often it's like, hey, we have an idea. Here's the brief. They'll either send me a script, or they'll say, we're gonna do a musical with Michael Mann, and it's written by the Avett brothers, and it's
Oh,
called Tucked
yes.
Away. Yeah, so that musical got put on hold, and hopefully we're gonna do it very soon. So that, for example, that would be, the information as a production manager that I take from that kind of really short assumptions is,
Hmm.
okay, great. I know Michael. I know roughly what scale designers he works with. I kind of know what to expect.
Yeah.
And then what theater is it going in? And that way I can build the budgets. So like, how big's the cast? How big's the band?
Hmm.
How long are we rehearsing for? What does tech and previews look like? So that all informs how I help build the schedule and budgets.
That's amazing. That's I saw that on Berkeley site and I was like, ooh, that sounds exciting. Cause I mean the Avits are from North Carolina. And so we have
No.
like we have a special affinity here for them. I have many of their records.
Oh my God. We were so excited, and then the pandemic happened. So right
Yeah.
now we are still going to try and do it. So it's coming up, and we just moved it later in the season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So how did you first get involved in theater, and what sort of led you specifically to production management? Because I mean, you talked a little bit about how you sort of got there. Because it's not usually it's not something you always hear someone be like, oh, I can't wait to be a production manager. A lot of times when I meet production managers and things, it's sort of like they've, you know, evolved into it from being like a TD or even, yeah, like from another position. And they're like, oh, I have an affinity for schedules and budgets and organization. And so they end up, Pokemon evolving into a production manager, but like, how did that all work for you?
Um, I fell into theater when I was around 17. So I grew up in Singapore, and that
Yeah.
was follows the British education system.
Uh-huh.
So which means you take a big exam at 16 called the O levels, and then you take one again at 17, 18 called the A levels, and then you wait for 3 months until you get your results to decide if you're going to college.
Right.
And so I was in between that. I was 3 months, I was doing nothing. And a friend from junior college had called and said, hey, do you want to come work for this company? She was in box office, and she was like, they're doing this weird outdoor thing, and they just need people to help fold fabric. And it basically, so I was like, sure, great. I showed up, and it was basically a site-specific play that was massive about comfort women from Japan who came to Singapore during the World War II. And so I like to say that almost everybody in the Singapore theater scene was in that production. And I had no idea, like clueless. And I walked in and I was like, wow, these folks are really cool. I think it was the first time I felt fully accepted for just who I was. And there was something about that made me, like, this light bulb went off, and I was like, these are my people.
Yeah.
And I never left. I think that I was so moved. Also, because I grew up in a pretty conservative family, so there was not a lot of like physical affection.
Mm-hmm.
And and theater people are like, oh my God, and hugs and kisses, and I was like a little bit overwhelmed, and also really just delighted. I was just like, oh, I didn't know I was missing all of this.
Yeah.
And I did really badly on the exam, so don't let failure be a deterrent. I basically didn't fail bad enough to go back to the school, and I didn't do good enough to go to college, so I had to repeat the year on my own, which was very hard. And but what kept me going was this, like, I found my group of people. I know I want to do theater. I need to study to get to do theater. And so that kept me going. And
Get a goal.
yeah. And that's it. That's pretty much how I fell into theater. And I tried to leave production management for a while. I tried to do stage management, but nothing excited me. I felt like technical direction was too far removed. Like, I was so specialized in figuring out the set. I really missed having the overview and really kind of being able to bounce between departments.
That's fun. I'm a big picture person myself, and sometimes get bogged down in like just scenery. What? I like to think about it all, but
Come to the dark side. Come to production management.
well, I don't know. I am not organized enough for that. I'm sure Josh would agree, and they're like, that is not for me. But I do have lots of ideas, and I get to bombard him with them all the time. So that's great. So, I mean, I feel like you maybe already answered this, but was there a job that where you felt, yes, this is it, I'm doing the thing, this is what I want to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first job at Theater Works on that show, it was called Broken Birds. It was epic, and it was so epic. I mean, if you think about it, that was like in the 90s, and in Singapore. I mean, like, it was so epic. That show really blew my mind. And it was such a moving story, and it really made me think a lot about all of those people that just were forced to go to another country because they believed they were in service of their country doing something. You know, it was just, it was so interesting. Anyway, I would say that as you mentioned, most production managers in this country come through like lighting or TD or stage management. You know, I think for me, now that I've been in this for a while, it's sometimes along the way, there's a show that just deeply moves you enough that reminds you, like, this is why I do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't come by as often anymore. I don't know about you, but like when it does, it's big. It's like you stand in the back of the theater and you kind of listen to the audience take it in. It's so powerful. I'm sure you know what I mean. If you stand in the back of the theater and you just know the moment that moves them in some way. So that keeps me. Again, the other moment of like, oh, I should just like go work for some corporate thing. And always these one or two shows that come along the way that like, wow, we can actually really change how people feel and think about something through live storytelling that is not the same as watching a movie of film.
Agree. And it's all about being in that room and in that space, which is why this has been so hard.
Exactly. This has been, you know, an opportunity, if you look at it the other way, of remembering what we need in theater, right? Like, because sometimes what frustrates me is that we are so excited about the bells and whistles and the latest, greatest automation, moving lights, that sometimes I think we've forgotten that you can tell a very powerful story with very little.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always where my head is. I'm always trying to think like, can we do this with less? I mean, obviously budget. So, but like, how can we tell this most powerfully with what we have, and not overwhelm it too? Like, yes, all of that. So, were you always a really organized person? I mean, as I'm assuming you are very organized, because most production managers, TDs, stage managers are extremely organized. Or is that something that you kind of developed?
I don't know that I'm very organized, but I definitely feel like that, you know, friends who are not theater people do have this, they feel like I'm very, so when I moved from New York to San Diego, I like, you know, organized my Excel sheets. I packed every box. Every box had Excel inventory. I took a photo. I labeled it. So for them, it's like that. This is organized. But okay, in general, yes. I would say.
I'm gonna call. Yes, I'm gonna say yes. That equates as being very organized, my friend.
The pandemic year has been very terrible, and I've been very scattered. Very scattered. Also, because now I don't have my associate who, you know, I think that it's very hard to move from vision, like planning, vision,
Yeah.
philosophy, like figuring out plans, and then go into the nitty gritty of actually like, how do you write this contract? Where do you file it? What do you call it? How do you file all the USA forms? So USA is the design
Yeah.
union, and there's like, you need the cover sheet, you need this, you need to get the signature, and that I'm getting lost in. I would just be straight up and say I'm not super organized that way. But you know, the thing that switched for me as well is I don't track my time. I track my energy. So it's something I teach my students as well. It's no good. You have so much time, but if you sit in front of a computer and you're looking at the same spreadsheet for 3 hours and you made one change, it means you're burnt out. You're out of energy. So don't waste your time and sit in front of it.
Yeah.
So it's how do you maximize that kind of focus energy that you have, and then how do you know when to call it quits? Because so you know, the tendency when we were at School of the Arts was I'm just going to draft until I drop dead, and that is not a good idea, because at some point you're just not, so then you're just not resting, you're not taking care of your body and health.
Yeah.
And that took a long time. I was production managing at the Weston Playhouse, and I pulled 3 all-nighters, you know, because we were crazy back then. And then I got really sick. That was the last time I did it. I got a high fever. I passed out, and my friend, as you, McLean Snow was one of the people I called, and he happened to come up to help. From then I was like, I can't do this anymore. My body's clearly saying this is not a good idea. So I would say manage your energy and then put it in your calendar. So in my calendar, I put in all my meetings, and then I actually sneak in time. I call it bandwidth. And so like my associate knows what this means. It just means I need time to look at all the emails and respond, or I need time to do something. So I can't go from meeting to meeting to meeting and expect to be productive.
Right.
And if you don't put it in your calendar and people keep inviting you for stuff and you keep saying yes, you're going to run out of energy really quickly. So how do you manage that so that you can stay focused and your best self? And how can you not get lost in just spiraling? Because that happens to me when I know it happens to me when I lose focus. So I just like, you know, I don't know, spiral on some like website, and I go into this rabbit hole and I'm not doing anything really productive. So that's been the most helpful thing for me.
That's pretty great. Yeah, I've been trying to think more like that lately as well, like making sure I have more time. And that's been one of the nice things about the pandemic is, you know, aside from like large systemic reevaluation, you can also think about, you know, your relationship to work and how you work personally too.
Yeah. And how do you, so if I'm like, okay, I'm very good for 2 hours and then I really need a break, whatever that break means, walk around the block, get a cup of tea, take a break and come back, then I'm better focused at solving a problem. The other thing that I do as a production manager is very often I have a lot of challenges to solve. And sometimes I don't have a clear answer, a path. So I might put it aside and walk away. Because if I'm looking at it and I can't figure it out, it's better to walk away and let it come to you at some point, or pick up the phone and call somebody else to just talk it out. You know, what have you done before? Have you faced something like that? So that you can just hear yourself talk out a solution, which happens a lot. So I have a couple friends that I text. I'm like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this challenge? Have you faced this before? Have you shipped a trailer from this place to that place?
That's a documented like design thing. Like you need time to let things sit and ruminate for it to really for the ideas to really pop. And sometimes, you know, it's not always a really passive thing where you're just like daydreaming. Sometimes it's really active and like, you like talk to one of the other designers, like, what do you think about this or that bit? And all like, yes, that's a very design way of thinking, which is awesome. It's super helpful. And what's helpful about it, and what I tell students about it, is to understand that that is an actual part of the process, right? It's not just thing that you can do, but you're not being inactive when you're daydreaming or you're whatever. It's a documented time. It's a real thing where you're going to be frustrated and you're going to need time to like think it through and pause. And you're not shirking your job, you're doing your job by doing that.
Yeah, and sometimes forcing it is not, it's not gonna happen. So
Nope.
it's just like relax, breathe, go lift some weights, or run around the block, or do something else that is helpful for yourself to be your best self, and then come back to it. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, so I like to also say my partner's a midwife, so she really deals with life and death, and what we do in theater most of the time is not that. So there is definitely life safety factors that you need to put in for load-in, but like, choosing a fabric for a chair, deciding how you're going to write this contract is not the moment that's like, there's going to be another show, there's going to be another tech, and so it's like, don't let yourself get bogged down by this, like it has to be perfect, because no.
Yeah, because there's no such thing as perfect.
Do you know that I used to, in my first year at school, draft a piece of homework for Dennis like 3 times?
What?
Yeah, I was so obsessed with perfection that I would draft it once to practice, and I would draft it twice to see if I could get it better, and then I would draft it a 3rd time. So I would basically spend all of my time doing one homework because I was so obsessed with this, and it took a long time before I was like, what am I doing? But
wow.
yeah, that was a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I know that, like, for me, being in charge of such a huge thing as like all of production for a theater sounds like anxiety inducing. Like, do you ever feel overwhelmed, or do you have like ways to like that, or do you have things that keep you from being overwhelmed by any of that? I don't know, maybe you don't at all, so it's not a big deal, but
I don't think I get overwhelmed. I think it's almost like thinking it's so I do have a really remarkably amazing team at Berkeley Rep. Most of the heads of departments have been there for a very long time. Really skilled and kind. So, I think for them, like the production management chair keeps rotating. So I think to the annoyance of like, who's this new person again? But so what I'd say is it's really fun for me to be able to work with such a group of amazing colleagues, because I can simply say, hey, here's a priority right now. Can we think about this? And then they'll, with their own personalities and the ways in which they're all very wildly different personalities and different ways of solving problems. And like collectively they complement each other. So it's like, I'm like, okay, this is a really important thing. Please remember to do this thing, or can we think about this? And then they'll start thinking about it and then moving. So I don't know that I feel overwhelmed. A lot of times I feel this sense of responsibility of, I feel like my job is done if I've given them the best space and the best resources for them to do the best work. I feel the same about artists, because so at Berkeley Rep, we do a lot of shows that bring a lot of artists from other areas and a lot of times from New York City. So they're with us for 12 weeks. So you walk into a theater as a designer, you're with us from pre-production fabrication to tech and previews. If you've never been with us before, there's obviously a lot of stuff like, oh, how does it work here? Who am I talking to? So like making sure they know and empowering them to like, hey, if here's what you're going to walk into, here's who you're talking to. We started doing this thing of like, so here's the other thing. A lot of this, and I don't know if this is true for you, Jayme, like, so if you design at theater A to theater B to theater C, a dollar means different things to different theaters. So it's very difficult for designers when you're like, here's your materials budget. Well, I don't know what this buys me. And so we started like, cause I'm like, we really need to be able to convey what this means for Berkeley Rep. So a photo of an old production, this is roughly about $5,000, so that you have a sense of it, so that we're not starting at such different expectation levels.
That would be really helpful, because like $5,000 in one space is going to be a lot, and in another space not nearly enough. It just like, you have to fill a space with things, right? And the show and the size of that space. So those two things, like understanding those two things and what that equation means, is super helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes I find that, so if I'm really focused on my role here as the production manager, is to make sure that everybody has the information they need and have a space in which they can do the best art or manage the best department. It takes away maybe the sense of overwhelmness. I think that the one time I was a little bit overwhelmed was when I was at Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I was working on Paul Simon, and I adore Paul Simon. Like, I mean, he's like a guy you don't think I would ever meet in person.
Right.
And he's working with another well-known artist called Oscar Hernandez, who is the head of the band. And I couldn't get Oscar and the band to sound check because they come from rock and roll. So they're not like, there's a very different sense of sound checks and line checks for rock and roll than to musical theater. And gosh, it took so much for me to just like put it aside. So in the back of my brain, I'm like freaking out, because it's like, oh my God, it's Paul Simon. And then the other part of my brain is like, okay, production manager, you got to sort this out. So I like stand them on the stage, and I was like, we need to sound check. And ultimately, Paul is like, we got to sound check. So great, because then it happened. But like, that was an out of body moment of when I work with artists that I have followed their work, and then I meet them in person and need to manage them. That's the moment where there's a little bit of like out of body experience. And I really try and center and ground myself of like, what does this artist need to do their best work? They need a sound check. So I'm going to make that happen. And I need to put my own ego and self aside. And to make this happen, they're just another artist. So, I need to make this happen for the sound design team as well. So that was a weird moment. That was a bizarre moment in my life.
It sounds intense.
And it was fun. I mean, like, ultimately, I had such a good time on that show. It was just that, moment that comes up of like disbelief of being on stage with Paul. It was just a little bit crazy.
That is a little crazy. Wow. So that sounds like an exciting moment. Do you have like, what has been your most exciting project or favorite project to work on? I know they're all your children, and it's always hard.
Yeah.
But like...
It's hard. I don't remember. So a lot of times the challenging moments are the ones that you remember, right? Like,
the stuff that sucks is hard.
That was hard, that you kind of swam through. I would say that in recent history, one of my favorite productions has Come From Away, which is the musical on Broadway that started part of its journey at La Jolla Playhouse in Seattle Rep. And, truly a joy. That was such an amazing group of people. And, and we had we had a lot of challenges for resources at the beginning of time. So if you talk to Beowulf, I'm sure he would tell you, like, there was a lot of like, oh, we don't have enough money. Can we figure out these trees?
I love his design for it too. I've referenced it in other work that I've been doing. I was like, oh, I really love the texture of this.
Yeah, and if you like kind of flash back to like all that nitty-gritty conversations of like, how do you reduce the resources because we don't have enough money, all the same conversations that we always have. And then now it's doing so well. That's an international tour. It's really amazing and crazy to witness. The other one that was really difficult that I enjoyed a lot was the Bridge Project, which was a 3-year collaboration that BAM did with the Old Vic Theater, which was basically Kevin Spacey was the director, and the concept was it was half American, half British. For every single component, so like technical, designer, cast. And the first 2 years were 2 shows in rep. And then we would start either in New York or London and then tour the world and end up at the home location. So in the 3rd year, they started at the Old Vic, they toured, and then they came to BAM. In the first 2 years, I think we started at BAM, and then we toured the world and ended at the Old Vic.
Okay. Wow.
And those were difficult productions. I mean, the scale of it was big. And it was hard to figure out the repping pieces of it. Like there was one show that we had very little time to switch, and it had water, and we had to dye the water a little bit so it looks like an endless pool, and then the next thing had white carpet for snow. So like, how do you prevent that? Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of like little, yeah, that was awesome. That was pretty fun. That was a hard experience, but it was fun.
That sounds kind of amazing. I'm jumping around a little bit now, but
yeah.
Well, so you mentioned you're from Singapore originally, and you came here to learn more. Was the transition from Singapore to the US a difficult one? I mean, so there are two kind of parts to that potentially. Like there's culturally, of course, but then there's also just like as it pertains specifically to like theater, because sometimes there's some differences.
I would say that it's all entangled for me. So I think it's both. I think Singapore is a very city country, and it's like Tokyo, a big city. So you basically you don't need a car, is what I'm saying. You just hop on public transportation, it's very available, or cabs, super available, and then arriving at Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I had no plans for a car because I'm like, any city's going to have public transportation, right? So yeah, so the first year was really hard. So I would say that the theater learning part was great. I really spent so much energy trying to figure out how to get to grad school, writing for scholarships and stuff like that. And I'm here ready to go. I can absorb data, but I can't get to the drafting store to get drafting supplies. Like, it's not easy to.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I couldn't figure out how to get groceries. So I used to stay at these apartments called Center Stage right by school. And I figured out that it took me about 20 minutes to walk to the closest grocery store. And I think I tried walking the first week, and then I stood at the bus stop, and a very kind woman came out from the store and said to me, "You shouldn't stand here. You should call someone to pick you up. It's not a great part of town at that time."
Oh, wow.
And then I became, so there were a lot of very kind people that really helped me. I think the way the school ran was the graduate program really ran together with the undergraduate program. So I consider all of them my classmates anyway. So
yes, same. Yeah.
First year grad was like with the second year undergrad. So a lot of the undergrad students actually were really amazing, and but it was hard for me to build friendships. So I'm a little bit older, trying to figure out how to talk to a younger person from a different culture, and like, how do I ask for help? I mean, that was so entangled, trying to figure out how people interacted, what was acceptable, what was not. So there was so many levels of like, I can get the technical theater. Like, if you teach me how to weld, I can weld. That's a repetitive motion.
Right.
But the fabric of trying to figure out how to fit in or how to be accepted in a group. And I would just say, like, NCSA is predominantly white. It was, and not that people were unkind. It was just difficult. And so those were the layers of as a person coming into a different institution, like how do I figure out how to survive and then thrive? I broke down after, I think it was after the first year. I was just like, I'm gonna get a car. And Mikey, who was a lighting student from California, never seen snow before, and there was another set design student from Singapore. I can't remember his name right now.
Chin
Who?
Yap.
No. Was
What?
it? Was it him?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were like, we're gonna get a car. I'm like, I'm gonna get a car, because the three of us figured out how to get on the high school dance program's school bus once a week to the mall to get groceries. And the high school kids were like, why are you here, old people? And it was a lot of fun. So when I look back, it's like both fond memories. It was fun and it was hard.
Yeah.
And then have to figure out like, so once I bought the car, it was fine. But the first year was just
Really
rough.
hard.
It was just rough. And social fabrics in the theater used to happen at off campus. Like, hey, let's go to so and so to get a drink.
Yeah.
I couldn't go to any of those. I could, because I'm like, how am I going there? And I was afraid to ask for help. So it was very rare that I would say, hey, unless somebody said, do you need me to pick you up and drop you off? And I'd be like, yes, that would be great. But it rarely happened.
Right.
So once I got the car, it was, the world opened up for me.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It was hard. It was hard. And then it was very hard then moving from North Carolina to New York City, because that was another huge shift.
Right. That's a very big difference.
Huge. And that took, I mean, it took 4 years until I really felt comfortable in New York City.
Wow.
So every city that I go to, I mean, I would say San Diego is very easy to find my way. The Bay Area has been a little bit challenging. It's like somewhere in between New York and San Diego, because it's like a little bit spread out, but it kind of still has city stuff. But it is. And as theater people, we often move for the job. And so like figuring out around you who's your community, where you're reaching out for help, like all of those things are part of how do you bring your best self to your work.
Yes, all of that.
Right, long answer to
no, it's
that first year.
It's important information, like that's stuff people need to know, especially like that happens, and that's what people are experiencing when they're coming here from another country, and it's so helpful. Let's see, was there like a formative person or experience that sort of led you to production management, or sort of that was invaluable to you in your career that helped you along the way?
I would say that there've been many people that have, what I like to say is, loved me into who I became. The ones who like show you so much love that you couldn't see for yourself until you became that person.
Yes.
I will say, like our shop foreman at UNCSA, Monty Heath, was one of them. And so many, like there are people that you don't realize were trying to light your way until later.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, and I feel very lucky that I've like met the ones who are like, hey, here's the next step. Watch where you're going. Watch out, because like you don't always know. And then as my stubborn self, I'm like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. And then it's like, oh no. You didn't tell me about this part.
You were right, darn it.
Yeah. I think a lot of the early production managers that I look up to, my old managing director and general manager at TheaterWorks, so the first people I worked for, Tay Tong and Michelle, they're still in my life and they still check in with me whenever I go back to visit.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, I will say that the people I consider my mentees, they're actually my mentors too. Like, I will say that the people who are young and very wise, they often challenge me in a way. So I consider all the young people that I have a chance to interact with also my mentors.
I agree. I feel that way too.
Yeah, I'm like, at some point I'm never gonna catch up with technology, and they'll be like, come on, Audrey.
I feel that way completely already. It's too late.
No, Jayme, don't give in. You got it.
I'm trying really hard. Along similar lines, like, was there a class that was sort of a non-theater class or a non-theater experience that also sort of helped like shape who you are? Or...
So after like a dramatic breakup that I had in New York, I flung myself into triathlons.
Oh.
I did. So I did triathlons for a number of years in New York. And what it really taught me was I tend to overplan and overpack. So like whenever it was a race, I'm like, oh, I need this. And then my bag got like so big. So the first race, I had like so many things just in case. It still happens. I still do that. But it definitely taught me to shed like the stuff I don't need and stop worrying so much. And, and also the importance of training. And so like you train a lot so that on race day, you have a really good time.
Right.
Right. So the hard part should be training, and then the race should be fun. So if it's opposite, then something's gone wrong. So like, it was a way for me to learn about my body and what my body needed. But like that informed me in terms of theater, because I think the triathlon races and that showed me like there's a life outside of theater. It's very easy to be just obsessed with one thing. And there's a lot of joy outside doing a hobby that has nothing to do with theater, and having a group of friends that you love and admire from different fields doing this hobby. They have no idea what you do in theater. So that brought me a lot of joy. And then the other thing is I used to train in Krav Maga in New York City, which is an Israeli street fighting style.
Yes.
It's so similar, right? It's similar in that whole group of people that don't do theater, and I spend time with them, and I really take care of myself in a different way. But so I can unplug from theater and I can regas my energy so that when I go back to theater, I can bring my best self. So I would say those two things pop up for me.
Yeah.
It's been a long time and a lifelong thing of learning how to take care of myself in theater, in the business of making theater, because a lot of times boundaries are really hard to set. And if you stay in this long enough, it's like, how can you keep doing this for a long time? Like, how do you sustain yourself? How do you live a full life? So there's so much besides, hey, how do I get my next job and my next gig? There's also taking care of yourself.
Yes, I think that's a thing that a lot of theater people struggle with a lot, like the boundaries, the obsession, that need for space and learning to like about life outside of theater is a huge thing. That's great. So we're getting fairly close to the end. So I'll ask you the last question we ask most everybody, which is what one piece of advice would you give to like a student or someone who is just starting out and is interested in production management?
I would say if you're interested in production management, be curious and be hungry, and reach out, like try it. That's the thing. It's like, I always say, try something once and see if you like it, try it twice, if and the third time, if you really don't like it, don't do it. But like, it's hard to explain what production management is, but it's easy once you're like assisting, or if you are closer to like, oh, this is what it is. I would say find, if you can find the ones who love you into who you become, like find those people, the mentors, find the people that can guide your way. Start saving for retirement. I tell all the students, figure out your retirement plan now. Um,
Yep.
don't wait. Um, and like figure out, you have a couple years before you get adulthood really sinks in, and by that, mortgage, kids, pets, that you can travel around the country and figure, you can jump on a tour, you can go to a city and try it out. At some point that you get more and more stuff that you are responsible for that makes you less nimble, so like just be
Yep.
aware of that, that window. Then adulting happens.
Then adulting happens and you have a mortgage and you can't just up and leave.
True, but still save for your retirement.
Yes, yes, gosh. I wish someone had given me that advice for sure. Oh my gosh. Well, Audrey, thank you so much for being with us and doing this for us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was really nice to catch up with you.
Yes, you too. Hopefully we'll see you again sometime soon in person and like at something, USITT something.
At something, yeah. I would love that, for real, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks to the audience and folks for joining us. And it's been great to talk to you. So we're gonna sign off here in just a second and run a clip. But feel free to log out at your leisure. And thank you again for doing this so much. It was really lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. Take care, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.